You mentioned Beltran, which brings us to your Mets. We talked a lot about Beltran last week, and I believe it was you who said, and others who said that if Beltran is traded, then the white flag will be waved by the Mets. But now it seems to be a fait accompli. It's just a question of when it's going to happen. Joel Sherman in the New York Post reporting that Mets officials feel that a deal could get done before the trading deadline, which is a week from this Sunday. Nick Cafardo in the Boston Globe quoting, saying that Beltran has already waived his no-trade clause for Boston. I guess in Pittsburgh, Tom Smith telling us that the Pirates are still interested in Beltran. So with so many suitors, where do you think, in your opinion, is the best place fantasy-wise, if you have Beltran or are thinking of trading for him, that he should end up? Is it the Giants in the National League or the Phillies, or is it going to the American League in a team like Boston that's so stacked?
Well, if you ask Brian Wilson, obviously he's going to say San Francisco, given the way he sort of introduced him at the All-Star game. But in terms of a fit, I mean, I don't think there's any place that's better than the other. I mean, the American League is a beneficial for him only because he would have the opportunity to DH, and if he needs a day off, it's not a day off where he's out of the lineup completely, but it's a day off whereby he gets to rest his legs a little bit as opposed to playing the outfield. I mean, any one of those situations, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia has been rumored, Boston, Detroit I know has been mentioned. Any one of sort of those situations sort of would be negligible in terms of fantasy impact. I mean, he has had a pretty good year in terms of driving and runs. Reyes being on base has certainly helped that. He may not have scored as many runs given the guys that are behind him, so he would get a mild upgrade. Moving from the NL to the AL would basically have him, to a certain extent, learning new pitchers, though with Interleague. Interleague is not really as difficult as it was in the past in terms of learning a whole new set of pitchers, because you do see some of them periodically in terms of games that you play against them. But I mean, I think fantasy impact to a certain extent is somewhat negligible. I think the key impact is going to be who the Mets get back and what type of piece they get back and what type of piece another team is willing to give up. Is it going to be a Zach Wheeler from San Francisco? Is it going to be maybe a Tabata from Pittsburgh? Is it going to be maybe a Demonic Brown from Philadelphia? Would Boston be willing to give up one of those guys? It's funny. I mean, a couple of years ago, there was big rumors where the Red Sox were going to offer Ellsbury and Lowry to the Mets for Reyes, and right now, any Met fan right now would be banging their head against the wall if they had made that trade. Sorry, not Ellsbury, sorry, Buchholz and Lowry. Given the injury to Buchholz and given Lowry's injury as well, I mean, you never know what you're going to get. So you want to get a guy who's somewhat major league ready or a top prospect. And the other player that I've heard mentioned this very prominently is the fact that the Mets may be in the market for a catcher. Josh Tolle hasn't panned out like they wanted to. Tony Peña's son, Francisco Peña, really hasn't panned out in the minors. I don't really have a ton of guys in the minor leagues who are going to be, big-time catchers for them in the future. So any team that would have a catching prospect that they could end up dealing, maybe a Tommy Josephs in San Francisco might be somebody who could be in the mix for the Mets, given them what their needs are going to be going forward.
All right, and let's talk about Jose Reyes. There seems to be article upon article written about him. Yahoo Sports coming out saying that reportedly, allegedly, he's told friends that if he had his choice, he'd like to sign with the Angels maybe in the offseason. People in Los Angeles downplaying that because they're happy with Eric Ibar and they don't think that Artie Moreno would go the extra mile if he goes on the open market. Also, a story by Newsday's David Lennon that says that because the Mets were such kid gloves and didn't push Reyes to come back, that their relationship might be better now. And David seemed to be intimating that in the past, from up above, there would have been pressure to get Reyes back in the lineup. What's the latest with Reyes, in your opinion?
Well, it's actually interesting. I mean, Leonard was just on WFN in New York and made a similar comment whereby, Reyes has basically been healthy for a week, but in the past, the Mets might have pushed him to come back early and potentially risked him re-injuring that hamstring, and by forcing him to the DL, almost somewhat similar to what Jerry Manuel did right after he took over from Willie Randolph on the West Coast by pulling him out of the game when he felt something. The relationship itself has improved, and also the relationship he has with Terry Collins. I mean, every player, almost to a man, has spoken about how great it's been to play for Collins, and it does give you some hope that Reyes, while he may not take a huge hometown discount as opposed to, Antonio Cromartie in football, basically telling the Jets he's going to explore the marketplace, he might be willing, as long as the offer is somewhat competitive, given that his family's here, given that he enjoys playing in New York, given that the relationship with Terry Collins as well as with Sandy Alderson has been so good, that he may be willing to take maybe slightly less than what's gone on in the open market. And there's rumblings, obviously, that they may want to open negotiations with him again, even though he said that he wants to test the open marketplace. Maybe behind the scenes again, they could sort of start talking to his agent and seeing if they could reach some form in accord. So A, I definitely don't see him dealt before the deadline. And B, I would say there's probably now somewhat of almost a 75 to 80% chance of him returning to New York, whereby in the past I might have put that percentage somewhere in the 50 to 60 range.